Austrians versus Austrians. In the fall of 1788, during the Austro-Turkish War, one of the strangest and most tragic friendly fire incidents in military history was caused not by the enemy, but by fear, confusion, and alcohol. The Austrian army, stationed near the town of Caransebeș in present-day Romania, was a formidable force of soldiers from across the empire speaking many different languages, following different orders. One night, a reconnaissance unit crossed a river and encountered local merchants offering them drinks. Soon after, another group of Austrian soldiers arrived, demanding their share. Arguments broke out, tensions flared, and then someone opened fire. Panic ensued. In the darkness, someone shouted, "Turks!" in panic. Officers shouted, "Halt!" in German, which was misheard as cries of "Allah!" by non-German speakers. Panic turned to retreat, and the retreat turned into disaster. The artillery opened fire, believing an Ottoman attack was underway. By morning, hundreds of Austrians lay dead or wounded. When the Ottomans actually arrived a few days later, they found no defenders, only the aftermath of a self-inflicted disaster. It was a battle that had been lost before the enemy had even appeared. The Xhosa cattle killing in 1856, amid colonial pressure and a livestock plague, a young Xhosa girl named Nonkawusi claimed to have received a prophecy from her ancestral spirits that would change everything. The message was clear but haunting. The Xhosa were to kill their livestock and destroy their crops. If they complied, the spirits would raise the dead, replenish their herds, bring bumper harvests, and drive the British colonists into the sea. Desperate for hope and disillusioned by years of suffering, many believed her. Over the next year, nearly 400,000 cattle were slaughtered, and food production ground to a halt. The promised miracle never happened. By early 1858, famine had swept the region. Some 40,000 people died, and many survivors were forced to work under British control in the Cape Colony. What was supposed to be a spiritual rebirth turned into a humanitarian disaster. The British took more land and consolidated their control over the region. Nonkawusi's prophecy, once a beacon of hope, became a symbol of collapse, a tragic reminder of how faith, despair, and colonial impulses can converge into irreversible loss. Radcliffe Line, in 1947, as the British prepared to leave India after nearly 2 centuries of colonial rule, they made a fateful decision that sparked one of the greatest humanitarian crises in history. The subcontinent would be divided into 2 new nations, Hindu-majority India and Muslim-majority Pakistan. The man tasked with drawing the border was Sir Cyril Radcliffe, a British lawyer who had never set foot in India and was given just 5 weeks to divide a landmass of more than 400 million people. Using outdated maps and census data, Radcliffe drew the lines that would become known as the Radcliffe Line. But the final border wasn't even declared until 2 days after independence, leaving millions of people unsure of which country they belonged to. What followed was chaos. As communities suddenly found themselves on opposite sides of partition, an estimated 12 to 20 million people fled their homes in a mass exodus of violence, fear, and chaos. Mobs attacked trains, caravans, and villages. Between several 100,000 and 2 million people died. The Radcliffe Line is not just a border. It is a scar that has shaped the history of South Asia for generations. Trofim Lysenko, in the shadow of Stalin's Soviet Union, science was not a tool of truth, but of ideology, and Trofim Lysenko was its most dangerous agent. Lysenko, a poorly trained agronomist, rejected genetics in favor of his own unproven theories. He claimed that plants could pass on learned traits, such as cold tolerance, if exposed to certain conditions. With the promise of quick agricultural miracles, he won Stalin's full support. By 1940, Lysenko controlled Soviet biological research and used his power to silence serious scientists. Critics were fired, imprisoned, or died in labor camps, including the famous geneticist Nikolai Vavilov. Under Lysenko's orders, peasants were forced to adopt irrational methods, such as planting crops very close together in the belief that they would cooperate rather than compete. The results were disastrous. Harvests failed, and famine spread across the Soviet countryside, killing millions. Lysenko's influence even reached Maoist China, causing the disastrous Great Famine of the 1950s. His reign ended with Stalin's death, but by then, the damage had already been done. Lysenko demonstrated that blind allegiance to pseudoscience, when politicized, would cost more lives than any war. The Mamluks were slave boys, mostly brought from non-Arab regions such as the Caucasus and Central Asia, trained from a young age to become elite Muslim warriors. Intended to serve loyally under their masters, they were given military training, strict discipline, and complete isolation from the outside world. But over time, these slave soldiers gained power, wealth, and an identity of their own. In Egypt, they eventually broke free from the rule of their overlords, and, in 1250, took control and established the Mamluk Sultanate. They defeated the Crusaders, repelled the Mongols at Ain Jalut, and ruled Egypt and Syria for centuries. Ironically, a system designed to suppress autonomy created a warrior class that was too powerful to control. Even after the Ottoman conquest of Egypt in 1517, the Mamluks remained the region's rulers, maintaining influence well into the 19th century. What was originally a security measure had developed into a political revolution. The Mamluks demonstrated that power, once bestowed and honed, could transcend its original purpose and turn protectors into rulers. Battle of Manzikert. In 1071, the Byzantine Empire stood at a crossroads, desperate to regain its waning power in Anatolia. Emperor Romanos IV Diogenes led a large army to confront the rising Seljuk Turks near the town of Manzikert. His forces included not only Byzantine regulars, but also foreign mercenaries, some of them Turks of dubious loyalty. Early mistakes shattered the army, and as the Seljuks launched lightning attacks, chaos spread. On the day of the battle, as the Byzantines attempted to retreat and regroup, a devastating betrayal occurred. Andronikos Doukas, a rival general from a powerful aristocratic family, ignored Romanos's orders and fled. Panic set in. Some units fled, others turned on each other. Only a handful, including the Imperial Guard and some Armenian infantry, held their ground and were eventually surrounded. Romanos was captured, the first humiliating event in Byzantine history. When he returned, his enemies stripped him of power, blinded him, and sent him into exile. The defeat at Manzikert was not just a defeat, but marked the beginning of the slow collapse of the empire in Asia Minor and the disintegration of its military power. Dred Scott decision. In 1857, the United States Supreme Court issued one of the most infamous rulings in its history, a decision that would push the country closer to civil war. Dred Scott, a slave, had lived with his master in free states and argued that this residence made him a free man. His case went all the way to the Supreme Court, where the justices ruled 7-2 against him. Their opinion went far beyond Scott's personal claims. The court declared that blacks, whether slave or free, could not be citizens of the United States and therefore had no legal standing in federal court. Even more shocking, the court ruled that Congress did not have the authority to ban slavery in U.S. territories, effectively nullifying the Missouri Compromise and paving the way for slavery to expand across the country. The decision outraged the North and energized the abolitionist movement, giving impetus to the newly formed Republican Party and its rising voice, Abraham Lincoln. Rather than resolving the debate over slavery, the Dred Scott decision shattered any hope of compromise, deepened sectional divisions, and set the stage for the bloodiest conflict in American history. George W. Bush's Iraq invasion. In 2003, President George W. Bush launched a U.S.-led invasion of Iraq, a decision that would have devastating and far-reaching consequences. The Bush administration claimed that Saddam Hussein possessed chemical and biological weapons and had ties to al-Qaeda, the group behind the 9/11 attacks. Despite a lack of hard evidence and objections from key allies and United Nations inspectors, the invasion went ahead. Within weeks, U.S. forces had captured Baghdad and toppled Saddam's regime. But the victory was short-lived. No weapons of mass destruction were found, and the rationale for the war was broken. Iraq descended into chaos as looting, insurgency, and sectarian violence engulfed the country. The power vacuum that followed Saddam's downfall led to the rise of extremist groups, including ISIS. The war killed hundreds of thousands of people, displaced millions, and eroded America's credibility internationally. At home, it caused deep political divisions and growing distrust of the media and government. Bush's invasion of Iraq, once billed as a mission of liberation, is now remembered as one of the most consequential foreign policy failures in modern American history. Diocletian's division of the Roman Empire. By the end of the 3rd century, the Roman Empire was in decline. It was too large, too unstable, and constantly threatened by both internal and external rebellion. When Diocletian came to power in 284 AD, he realized a harsh truth. No single ruler could manage such a vast empire alone. In a bold and unprecedented move, he divided power first by appointing a co-emperor, Maximian, to rule the western half while he ruled the eastern half. Then, in 293, he expanded the system into a tetrarchy, adding 2 junior emperors to help govern the empire's outlying territories. For a time, this radical structure worked. It brought order, fortified the borders, and stabilized the empire after decades of chaos. But Diocletian's solution contained a fatal flaw: succession. When he voluntarily abdicated in 305, a rare act for a Roman emperor, the carefully balanced tetrarchy collapsed. Conflict erupted between the sons and allies of the previous emperors, once again plunging Rome into civil war. Although intended to preserve the empire, Diocletian's dismemberment deepened the cultural and political divide between East and West, hastening the collapse of the Western Roman Empire a century and a half later. Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. In December 1979, the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan, believing it could quickly stabilize a fragile communist government and prevent the rise of an Islamist regime near the border. The planned intervention quickly became a decades-long quagmire that drained Soviet resources, morale, and global standing. After assassinating Afghan leader Hafizullah Amin and installing a puppet regime, Soviet troops quickly took control of the cities. But in the mountains and countryside, fierce resistance emerged. The Mujahideen, backed by U.S. funding and weapons through the CIA's secret Operation Cyclone, waged a relentless guerrilla war. The Soviets responded with heavy bombing, scorched earth tactics, and millions of landmines, but they were never able to secure the countryside. As the war dragged on, it became known as the Soviet Union's Vietnam. Nearly 15,000 Soviet soldiers died, millions of Afghans were killed or displaced, and the conflict caused a humanitarian crisis. By 1989, the Soviets had withdrawn in defeat. The war left deep scars on both countries, and is now seen as one of the key factors that hastened the collapse of the Soviet Union just a few years later. A superpower had been subdued in the mountains of Afghanistan.